What makes Victorian clothing so fascinating? The short answer is that things were just made differently back then, but what does that mean? What makes a garment distinctly Victorian, and what can we learn from it? Today, let's look at some common features on Victorian dresses in the Clark's collection and talk about how these features became popular. We see a lot of new technology surrounding garment manufacture in the Victorian era. The most prominent example is, of course, the sewing machine. This changed the fashion world forever. Within 30 years of the invention of the sewing machine, ready-made clothing could be bought off the rack in retail stores. People still made their own clothing, but they could also have it professionally made and tailored to them. This leads to really interesting design choices and endless customization, and the tastes of the wearer really do shine through in every single garment. Machinery made more fabrics, prints, and materials available to the average person. Seen here is the lining to a dress in the Clark's private collection. As you can see, it's very brightly colored, and it's interesting to note that something like this would have been chosen for what at first appears to be a rather drab garment. The outside is kind of a matte brown, but the inside reveals some interesting secrets. In a post-industrial world, embellishments became affordable and accessible on the mass market. A lot of new fixtures like snaps, hooks and eyes, elastic, and celluloid stays were emerging for the first time. Seen here is a celluloid collar stay. When it was new, it would have been clear and it wouldn't have shown through the lace collar. The availability of sturdy fasteners and cheap decorations allowed for extravagance. Victorians really did go crazy with the embellishments, and excess was the name of the game. Things like lace, applique, bustles, and ruching became quick and cheap to do. Before the convenience of machinery, all of these things would have been done by hand. Embellishments, like seen here, would have taken hours to produce. Layers of fringe, beading, lace, braid, and ribbon would have all had to have been constructed by hand and then applied by hand. With the advent of machinery, these things became ready-made, and people could purchase them separately and then add them themselves. As a result, women's dress styles became excessively elaborate. It was popular throughout the Victorian era to add as many ornaments, flounces, and layers as possible. Contrasting this, though, what comes to mind when I picture Victorian clothing is thriftiness. How could an entire era of fashion be so frivolous and yet so practical? Let's look closer at some of the ways Victorians were efficient with their clothing. So there's a reason a lot of these garments survive today in one shape or another. Clothing was still incredibly valuable despite industrialization. Things were constructed to last as long as possible, and people repaired their garments until they couldn't be used anymore. When garments wore out beyond repair, it was common for them to be made into other items. Seen here is an interesting garment in the Clark's collection that was remade into something else. On the left, there is a photograph of a panel from a bodice, and on the right, there's a completely new garment. So what happened here is someone took a dress from probably around the 1890s, and they recut it into a smaller garment to match the fashion tastes of around the 1910s. Things like this happened often. Another example of Victorian resourcefulness is piecing. If a seamstress didn't have enough fabric to cut a pattern panel, she would sew multiple scraps of material together to make a large enough swatch of fabric. This was common practice among both professional and home seamstresses, and I've seen both homemade and professional garments in the Clark's collection show evidence of piecing. Also, amazingly enough, a significant number of Victorian dresses have pockets. It's common to find a small watch pocket concealed in the waistband or lapel, and many evening dresses have a single large pocket on the side or rear seam. Women would have stored all the things they needed for a night out in these pockets, like compacts, tickets, things like that. So in short, Victorian clothing was sensible and frivolous. The unique combination of seemingly opposite values is what makes a garment truly Victorian. Examining the finer details of these garments tells a story of a society that valued luxury, efficiency, and above all else, a smart outfit.